Hi, it's Mark from TLR. I'm here with Bernie Pawlik, Pawlik Automotive in Vancouver. 23-time winners, best auto repair in Vancouver as voted by their customers. And we're talking cars. How you doing, Bernie?
Doing very well.
2008 Honda Civic had a transmission problem. What was going on with this car?
Yeah, so this is a standard transmission, and the owner had mentioned that when he had the clutch either in or out, there was certain times there was some noises coming from the transmission. Figured either there was something wrong with the clutch or the actual transmission itself. So this is the concern we were dealing with, transmission noises.
So how do you test or diagnose those kinds of issues?
Yeah, so first of all, of course, a road test to verify the concern and see where the issue's occurring. And then from there, we tested on the hoist with some listening equipment, stethoscopes and things to just listen and see when the condition occurred. Because a lot of times you can kind of get an idea, is it a clutch problem or a transmission problem based on whether the clutch is engaged or disengaged or what gear you're in. So between the road test and the driving test, we kind of thought the clutch was more of the issue, but our next step was to actually remove the transmission to inspect. And we actually found that the transmission input shaft bearing was actually the item making the noise. There was excessive play in the bearing.
So is this a pretty involved repair?
Yeah, it's a transmission removal and transmission disassembly. So yeah, there's a fair bit of work involved, definitely more than if it was a clutch problem, because we have to take the transmission apart and either, overhaul it or repair it. There's a fair bit of work to be done.
So if the bearing is worn out, wouldn't that cause damage to the rest of the transmission?
Well, it can, and it depends on how long you leave that kind of thing. I'll just get into a picture right now. So there's a view of the transmission. These are all the gears, basically the gear sets in the transmission. The bell housing is this part down here. And the bell housing basically attaches the transmission to the engine. And inside this large area here that I'm sort of swirling my mouse pointer around is where the clutch is located. This large gear here, this is the final drive gear. This is the differential section. So it's a transaxle, actually not a transmission. And the transaxle is basically a transmission, which are these parts here. Again, if you're reading this, you're not going to see it, but with the mouse pointer, you can see these are the transmission gears here. It's a 5-speed transmission. And this is the final drive section here, which is the differential section. Anyway, so the bearing, the red arrow basically points to the area where the bearings were worn. We actually ended up replacing 2 bearings in this one. The main shaft bearing, which I believe is over here, we basically replaced both those bearings in that area. But yeah, if a bearing wears bad enough and the gears develop enough play between them, it can start breaking gear teeth or causing damage in that area. So also metal filings can be flung around inside the transmission, which can cause some pretty serious damage. Fortunately, there's a magnet inside the transmission, and all the metal filings and wear from the bearing, bits and pieces, and I didn't take a picture of it, I should have, but all the bits and pieces all went onto the magnet, which was perfect. So the magnet did its job and saved the rest of the transmission. So all we had to do is replace the bearing. This is a close-up. That's the main bearing that was worn out. And again, that's a kind of a closer view of that. This is the reverse idler gear here, just for reference. But that's basically the inside of the transmission. As I said, there's 2 bearings we replaced in this area, and that solved our issue.
So you have to take the transmission apart. Is this a fairly common for you guys? How do you proceed with this kind of repair? Is this something that you do on a regular basis?
Well, as far as commonality, the input shaft bearing failure on Hondas has actually been going on for quite a long time. So, as reliable as these cars are, that is one of the areas that does tend to go. We've seen it on Acura vehicles as well. So if you have a Honda with a standard transmission, an input shaft bearing failure is not an uncommon issue. It's not like a guaranteed to screw up issue like Subaru head gaskets, for instance, on a 2.5 liter Subaru, but it is common enough and it does happen. And normally, with a transmission repair, often we would just change all the bearings. But in this case, because it's a fairly common input shaft bearing issue, and the other bearings, we can spin them and get a feel for them. They all seem to be in pretty good shape, and all the metal filings had all gone onto the magnet. We felt it was pretty safe. We just cleaned the inside of the transmission, cleaned all the gears, and just replaced the bearings that were worn.
So you mentioned this is a common failure item. What kind of year range are we talking about?
I'm thinking that in the 2000, the first decade of 2000s, it's common around then. I think even late 90s, there was issues. I might be a little off on that, but certainly in the 2000s era, that's definitely an issue.
So you always say the Hondas are very reliable. Is this still the case with the 2008 Civic with a manual transmission?
Yeah, I still think it's a really reliable car. So I was saying a moment ago, I mean, it's not like if you have one with a manual, it's guaranteed the input shaft bearing is going to go bad. It does happen on some models. You know, the only other defect I've seen on these Hondas is around this model year again is sometimes the engine blocks crack. We had one a while ago where, and this is not an entirely uncommon issue, although we've only ever seen it with one client, but the engine block cracks and you have to replace the engine. So that's not a good thing. But again, it's an issue that happens, but not really commonly. So something to watch out for. Now, the thing is, you know, if you don't have any antifreeze in your engine, you can certainly accelerate that process. But these are for, you know, people who maintain their car well and have proper antifreeze. There's just some defect in the engine block. So it's probably one of those things where you have an inspection on the vehicle, it'll look fine, you buy it, and it might happen. But those are just sort of two things to look out for on these cars. Otherwise, I'd say they're, you know, pretty much bulletproof, reliable.
Is there any way to lessen the odds of this transmission bearing going bad, like changing your transmission fluid a little bit more than what's recommended?
Well, I'd say changing the fluid every 50,000 kilometers is a good recommendation. Whether that would save the bearing or not, I don't know. We do a lot of Volvo differentials, rear differentials. They wear out even for people who change the fluid. I think sometimes it's a bit of a design defect that maybe the bearing just wasn't quite up to snuff for the job. But, you know, certainly if you change the fluid more frequently, you've got a better chance of it surviving.
If you need service on your Honda in Vancouver, the guys to see are Pawlik Automotive. You can reach them at 604-327-7112 to book your appointment. You have to call and book ahead. They're always busy. Or check out the website, pawlikautorepair.com. Hundreds of videos on there, all makes and models and types of repairs. The YouTube channel is Pawlik Auto Repair. Same story, hundreds of videos, hundreds of stories, all kinds of happy customers who've had their vehicles repaired. And of course, thank you so much for watching and listening. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for watching and listening. We appreciate it.